the call that shook the continent. When whispers of an extraordinary ultimatum leaked from diplomatic circles, the world held its breath. U.S. President Donald Trump and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu had reportedly joined forces in a high-stakes bid to corner Captain Ibrahim Traoré of Burkina Faso, the young leader who has become a symbol of African defiance. The demand was simple yet ruthless. Within 48 hours, Traoré must withdraw support for a Pan-African coalition backing Palestinian statehood and abandon calls for sanctions on Israeli settlements, or face severe economic and political punishment. Such ultimatums are rare, but not unprecedented. What was unprecedented, however, was the man on the receiving end, a 38-year-old captain from Ouagadougou who rose to power in a lightning coup and has since built his image on resisting foreign pressure. Traoré was expected to waver. Instead, he chose a different path, one that could alter Africa's geopolitical landscape for decades to come. The ultimatum was delivered with brutal clarity. According to sources close to the State Department, Netanyahu pressed Trump to enforce the 48-hour deadline, warning that Africa's growing alignment with Palestinian causes posed a dangerous precedent. Trump, ever eager to demonstrate strength, reportedly agreed to back Israel's stance with America's economic muscle. The terms were stark. Burkina Faso would lose critical aid packages, face restrictions on international trade, and potentially see U.S. troops withdrawn from Sahel operations if Traoré did not comply. For many African capitals, this ultimatum felt like déjà vu. The continent has a long history of being caught between global powers, forced to pick sides under threats of aid cuts or diplomatic isolation. Yet this case carried a symbolic weight beyond dollars and weapons. By targeting Burkina Faso, a country not traditionally in the spotlight, the Trump-Netanyahu axis was sending a message to all African leaders: step out of line, and consequences will follow swiftly. The news spread quickly through diplomatic cables and media leaks, causing ripples from Dakar to Nairobi. Some leaders privately expressed worry that Traoré's defiance would drag the whole continent into a standoff. Others saw in him the chance to test Western resolve and perhaps, finally, to assert Africa's sovereignty. In global capitals, analysts debated whether the ultimatum was a bluff or the start of a dangerous showdown. If the ultimatum was meant to intimidate, it had the opposite effect. 23 hours after receiving the warning, Traoré appeared on national television, flanked by military officers and the Burkinabe flag. His words were calm but fiery. Africa will not bow to ultimatums. Justice is not negotiable. We will not silence our voice for Palestine, nor will we betray the dignity of our continent. With that declaration, Traoré rejected both Trump and Netanyahu's demands. Instead of retreating, he doubled down, announcing an emergency summit in Ouagadougou for African states interested in forming a united coalition to challenge what he called neo-colonial dictates. The response was electric. In the streets of Burkina Faso, thousands marched in support, waving both national and Palestinian flags. Across social media, hashtags like Naksh Africa Stands and No to Ultimatums surged. Even in nations where governments remained silent, citizens voiced admiration for Traoré's boldness. But defiance came with risks. International markets reacted nervously, with the Burkinabe currency under pressure and whispers of sanctions spreading fast. Diplomats in Paris, London, and Washington warned of potential economic fallout. Yet, in that moment, Traoré seemed less concerned with financial markets than with history books. The defiance in Ouagadougou was felt across the continent. African leaders found themselves at a crossroads. Some, like Ghana and South Africa, issued supportive statements, praising Traoré for standing up to external meddling. Others remained cautious, fearing economic retaliation. Countries heavily reliant on Western aid, such as Malawi or Liberia, kept their distance, unwilling to risk the wrath of Washington. Civil society, however, was less hesitant. Activists, students, and religious groups across Africa hailed Traoré as a hero of a new liberation movement. In Nigeria, university campuses organized solidarity rallies. In Kenya, Muslim leaders praised his defense of Palestine. In Senegal, opposition parties used his stance to criticize their own government's alignment with the West. Yet the excitement was matched by concern. Economists warned that sanctions could devastate Burkina Faso's already fragile economy. Security experts noted that alienating the U.S. might weaken counterterrorism cooperation in the Sahel, leaving millions vulnerable to extremist violence. Critics accused Traoré of gambling with his people's livelihoods for the sake of ideology. Still, the symbolism mattered. For decades, Africa had been portrayed as a passive recipient of aid and orders. Now, one of its youngest leaders was flipping the script. Whether reckless or revolutionary, Traoré's stance forced Africa to confront a question it had long avoided. Would the continent stand together against external ultimatums or retreat into silence? In Washington, the mood was furious. Trump, angered by what he saw as open defiance, called for options ranging from aid suspension to targeted sanctions. Yet not everyone in his administration agreed. Some argued that punishing Burkina Faso would only drive it further into the arms of Russia and China. Both eager to expand their influence in Africa, Netanyahu, meanwhile, was under pressure at home to demonstrate strength. For Israel, the issue was not just Burkina Faso, but the dangerous precedent it set. If one African leader could defy Israeli and American pressure without consequences, others might follow, emboldening Palestine's diplomatic campaign across the global south. Behind closed doors, European leaders urged restraint. The EU, already uneasy about Trump's unilateral diplomacy, feared escalation could destabilize the entire Sahel. At the UN, debates erupted over whether this ultimatum violated international norms of sovereignty. Meanwhile, Moscow and Beijing saw opportunity. Russian state media hailed Traoré as a lion of Africa, while Chinese envoys offered discreet promises of trade deals and infrastructure loans. The crisis, in effect, was no longer about one ultimatum. It had become a chess match in which every move reshaped the balance of global power. With the 48-hour deadline passed and Traoré unmoved, the question loomed: what next? Analysts sketched out several scenarios. One possibility was swift economic retaliation. The U.S. could suspend aid, restrict trade, or even sanction Burkina officials, creating immediate hardship. Another scenario envisioned diplomatic isolation, with Burkina Faso shunned in Western capitals but embraced by alternative partners. Domestically, Traoré faced his own gamble. If sanctions bit hard, public support could erode, giving rivals an opening. Yet if he weathered the storm, he might cement his image as a Pan-African liberator. For Africa as a whole, the stakes were even greater. A united response could mark the dawn of a more independent foreign policy era. But division and hesitation could expose fault lines that external powers would exploit. In essence, the showdown was not just between Traoré, Trump, and Netanyahu. It was about Africa's place in the world. Would the continent continue to bend under pressure, or would it forge its own destiny, even at great cost? The answer was far from certain, but one thing was clear. The ultimatum meant to silence Burkina Faso had instead amplified Africa's voice. As the dust settles, the world waits to see how the crisis unfolds. For now, Ibrahim Traoré remains defiant, standing at the edge of history with his fists clenched and his continent watching. Trump and Netanyahu must decide whether to escalate or recalibrate. Africa must decide whether to rally or retreat. The 48-hour ultimatum has expired, but its echoes reverberate from Washington to Ouagadougou. What began as a demand may end as a turning point. The showdown that awaits Africa is not just about geopolitics, it is about identity, dignity, and the courage to chart a course free from foreign dictates.